Have you ever tried to grow your hair out from a certain length into a longer shape, whether it be a lot longer, even just a little bit longer, and you stopped because it drove you crazy, right? The grow out process is a pain, and the in-between stage can be a nightmare. Am I wrong? No, I'm right. If you've ever been there, today's video is gonna hit on some points that are really gonna help you out the next time you decide to make that move, or if you're deciding to make the move, this video is for you. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna introduce you to Holly in just a second, and there are some mistakes that are going on with Holly's hair right now, and most of them are actually a result of the fact that she's kind of in an in-between stage as she's growing her hair out. So we're gonna walk through how she could kind of modify those things to get a more youthful look, and more importantly, to kind of help her get through that process and navigate it without it driving her totally insane. If you have been hanging out around this series, you're a veteran, you know what's about to happen. We're gonna introduce you to Holly, and while I'm doing that and explaining to you what is going on with this series and kind of what we do, veterans, go ahead and comment below with what you think we should do with Holly's hair. Now, I also want you, while you're down there, to throw out a comment as to what kind of stands out to you when you look at Holly's photos. What are the kind of attributes that really pop out? We're gonna be talking about that later on in the video, so comment that as well. My name is Justin Hickox, and in this particular series, subscribers from this channel actually send in photos asking me for my advice as to what mistakes they may be making with their hair, and more importantly, how they can modify those mistakes to get a little bit more of a youthful look. And so with all of that said, why don't we dive into some mistakes? And side note, I always get asked, where are you in these videos? Because I usually don't say. Well, today I'll tell you, we're in Leavenworth, Washington. And that view, one, doesn't suck, and two, also happens to be off of the deck of where we are currently staying. Yeah, also doesn't suck. Okay, did you comment below? Did you tell me what stood out to you about Holly? For me, there's a few things that stood out. One, she has beautiful eyes, she has extremely high cheekbones, and she's got amazing dimples. Because maybe I'm partial. Come here, babe. I may or may not be partial to dimples.
Which side do I have it on?
Which one is, there it is. See right there? Yeah, so there's that. But nonetheless, we will be talking a little bit more about her eyes and her cheekbones because they will definitely play a role in the suggestions that we have and yeah, all the good stuff. So let's dive into the mistakes, but first let me read the email. It's short, but it's important, that Holly sent. The email says, "Thank you so much for trying to help 45-year-old hair." Funny, that's so young. "I loved my angled bob I had forever, and my husband insists I grow it longer, so I have been for the past 12 months. I feel it ages me. Can't wait to see what you can help me and other women with." Okay, so mistake number one. I'm gonna first dial the kind of photo back, if you will. Now, this may not be the exact bob shape she had, but it's gonna be similar, and I can definitely use this for the process of teaching. So imagine that Holly is kind of here, right? She's got this bob, and she loves it. She starts to grow it out, and then she lands 12 months later where she is right now. Now, the biggest concern here is that more than likely, how Holly styled her bob is the same way that she's approaching styling this particular haircut. The same literal techniques on a day-to-day basis. And because of that, it's not functioning. And the reason for that is simply that as our hair grows through different lengths, it's kind of also growing through different hairstyles or haircuts, if you will. And therefore, approaching it in the exact same manner is not going to yield you the same results, which can become very frustrating. But that also leads us directly into mistake number two. Now, mistake number two kind of takes the blame off of Holly, if you will, for the mistake number one, and places it essentially where it deserves to be, which is just within the actual haircut. As you do grow through different lengths, it's important that we modify the shape to be appropriate for that particular length. At this point, even if Holly really switched up the way that she styled her hair, she still might find it kind of hard to get it to look right because it's not cut for that type of style. So she's kind of forced into styling it the way that she used to, which is, again, bringing us back to mistake number one. Now, mistake number three is a little bit less of a mistake and a little bit more of, I guess, an opinion. I think moving the part over a little bit further on Holly's side and actually adding a little bit more layers, back to what we talked about, mistake number 2, cutting that into a shape that's better suited for this length. We give it a little bit more volume in the areas that we want to see volume, as well as lightening that front length up a little bit around her face. All of these things together would help to accentuate Holly's high cheekbones, really bring more focus to her eyes, and I just think it would have a great aesthetic to it. So a little less of a mistake, a little bit more of an opinion, and it wouldn't be a massive change. But as I always say, it's a lot of little things many times that will add up to a much larger, more important shift. Shift is what I was trying to say there. Shift. Mistake number 4. Now, again, mistake number 4 is also a little bit of an opinion, but there is a little bit of element of kind of mistake involved in this, so we'll kind of break this all down here for you. So mistake number 4 has to do with the color. Now, my opinion side of this is that I'm a firm believer in the idea that lowlights and highlights really should be there to create some drama, but mainly to create dimension and really accentuate the haircut or the hairstyle. And when I look at Holly's specific color, it has a tendency to bring more of the focus to just the color and kind of takes the focus away from the style and Holly. Now, if you watch my last video, I actually talked about how important it is to have your hairstyle accentuate you, but not be the only thing that defines what people see when they look at you. And this is the same kind of scenario. The color has so much drama that it actually takes away from everything else, and it kind of becomes a little bit overpowering. Now, the other concern with this is I'm seeing a little bit of orange hue to some of the blonde. And this can happen for a couple of reasons. One, it can happen simply because of the daily environment. There are a lot of things that will add a little bit of a yellow or orange hue to especially really lightened hair, or hair that's lightened up to the level that Holly's hair is lightened. That can be water, that can be product usage, that can be smoking, that can be environment. It can be a host of different things. Now, the second thing, though, that can cause that is actually just the lightening process and not being lightened basically enough, or not having the ability to lighten it enough to get it out of that orange stage on its way to that really light stage. Sometimes it might take too much to get it lighter to the point where if you do get it that light, it's going to be beautiful on the floor because it'll all break off because the hair can't handle it. Now, there's definitely ways to get around that with different products to help rebuild what they call disulfide bonds, to help strengthen the hair as you're lightening it, all of these things. Now, another part of this equation is how thick the blonde highlights are. Many times, the thicker you go with those, the more hair you're trying to lighten up. It actually becomes more of a technical color, and that is harder for a lot of people to do for a multitude of different reasons. It's like bleaching your hair all over is much harder to get it to look uniform than to put in small highlights. Things can kind of blend a little bit better. But the bigger concern with all of this, and this is really the reason that I would say a mistake in this particular situation, has to do with how hard it's being on Holly's hair. And if you look at this area right here, you can see that there's a little bit of a chemical haircut going on. This is not uncommon. The concern, though, is when you're trying to grow your hair out, that hair that's growing out, as your hair gets longer, it's not being cut off as much, and those mid-shaft and ends aren't seeing the trim as often because they need to get that length. Therefore, all of the heat, all of the day-to-day styling, all of the environmental, all of the color, all of those things are adding up and compounding on top of each other, creating potential of even more damage or weaker hair that can't sustain being sometimes even pulled back in a ponytail, for instance. So that is a very long-winded way of saying mistake number 4. Okay, so should we get on to the suggestions and actually show you what this stuff would look like if Holly took my advice? And some curveballs. The curveballs are big ones. Let's do that now. Okay, so now the first basically 3 mistakes, all of those things basically kind of spoke to the same thing, which is just a cutting styling shift. So I'm going to show you all of those at the same time. Now, if we actually lightened up the layers a little bit, cut this a little bit more for the length that it's at, and we moved that part over just a tiny bit, well, this is what that would look like. Now, as you can see here, it's not a massive shift. In fact, I even still left the bob line kind of at the bottom, so we haven't really messed around with this too much other than lightening up the front around the bangs a little bit more to help cut in at Holly's cheekbone to bring more emphasis to her cheekbones and lift them even more, as well as adding a little bit more of that layering in the front and then pulling that part over to the side gives it a tiny bit more height and even lifts her eyebrow just a tiny bit on this side, as well as brings more attention to those beautiful eyes. So to me, this is a fantastic small shift that makes a big difference. Now, the fourth mistake was all about color, and I mentioned the Holly's color right now is just a bit too dramatic. If we went with a little bit more of a less dramatic color and we toned out some of that yellow, this is what that would look like. Now, this is still a bit of a cooler tone versus going like much warmer than I would suggest, but Holly could really kind of go either way with the cool or the warm to some extent. So really it's going to be a matter of what she's comfortable in. If you notice, she's wearing a lot of gold jewelry, which many times lead you to believe that a person is going to look a little bit, or at least be a little bit more comfortable with warmer tones. However, she also has a skin tone where she can kind of go both ways. So it's really, like I said, going to land on her, but I believe there are some cool tones with a little bit less green or ashiness to them that can be a little bit more complementary to Holly's overall skin tone. More importantly, since the width of the highlights are a bit smaller, it both brings more emphasis back to Holly, as well as it's a tiny bit easier to achieve this from a technical perspective, which means that there's less of a possibility of getting that orange hue she's currently seeing with her hair. With that said, this really isn't that much different on the technical and damage front, so it's not going to make a huge change to those concerns. But the bigger point with all of this was just bringing that focus back to Holly. Don't worry, when we get to the curveballs, which is happening next, we're going to talk all about color options because, yeah, I may or may not have come up with a lot of them. All right, curveballs. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stay right here because that is really pretty, so why move? You're welcome. Okay, now I have a lot of curveballs lined up, and I really wanted to focus on the things that we could change considering the specific situation that Holly is currently in, which is trying to get more length to the cut. So with that said, if we're trying to get more length, we can only shift the way that we approach it on a day-to-day basis, and then the way that we color it. So those are the kind of things that I wanted to focus on, rather than show random haircuts that are much shorter and crazier or whatever that don't really fit into Holly's long-term goal. Now, the first option would kind of show you what it would look like if Holly changed the shape with the way she cut her hair, cut it more for this length, and then essentially let it get a little bit longer, probably closer to the rough range that she's trying to end with. So if we did that, this is definitely one option that I think would look fantastic on her. Now, in this, what you can see is the color is a little bit cooler, but it's still a kind of warmer version of the cool, if that makes sense. But to me, this overall shape and color looks amazing on her. Okay, now the next shape that I want to show you is kind of right in between where Holly is right now and the longer length that I just showed you. But where we've switched things up is really kind of the approach that we take for styling. And then you'll see in a second the other thing that we switched up. So here is another option. Okay, so obviously, elephant in the room here, we clearly went a little bit darker with her color. We'll talk about that in 1 second. But what I like about this is the actual shape and style of it. We have switched things up minorly with the cut, but we really achieved the overall movement and texture and something like this with just a round brush or even a flat iron or a really large curling iron. It just gives the hair a little bit of a different overall shape that's a little bit less geared towards the sleekness of a bob. I personally like the movement and I like this overall style or where the layers sit, and this would grow out really well into the longer shape that we just showed you. So there's not a lot of things that would need to be changed with this moving forward. Now on the color front, this is clearly far darker than where Holly is now, and it's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. But I do really like the way that it adds a little bit of richness to her skin tone, and when we bring out that depth and the darkness in the color, it really has a tendency to pop her eyes a lot. Now, this may be way out of Holly's comfort zone, which makes perfect sense, but I definitely wanted to throw it out there because I think it's a really solid option. Oh, wait, Justin. What if she doesn't want to go dark? That's the question you have, right? What if she wants to keep her hair light? What do we do then? I got you covered. Here is another option. Now, obviously, in this one, you can see that it's the same style. We're just modifying the color a little bit, and now we're going a little bit lighter. And it's a different kind of cool. It's still very light and very cool, but not quite as, again, ashy as her color is currently. Another option that I think would be fantastic on her. But Maybe you're asking, and I'm annoyed with myself for saying it that way, but maybe you're asking, well, what if she wanted to do something kind of in between there? What if she liked the lightness around her face and still wanted to frame that with light, but maybe wanted some of the dimension and another little bit of added drama? Well, here is even another option. Yes, in this one, we've lightened up the front a bit, but we added a lot of depth, so it's kind of right in between the dark and the light that she's at now. Something like this would grow out really, really well. It still gives her the feeling of a bit of lightness around her face so she doesn't feel so dark, but also adds that little bit of drama, and I think looks kind of amazing. But the question never really lies on me as to what I think is amazing. You just know what I think is amazing because I just showed you 12 minutes of what I think is amazing. So the question now becomes what you think is amazing. What do you like? Babe, what do you like? She is up there. She cannot hear me. So never mind. What do you like? That's what I want to know. Comment below and let me know what you think, what she should do. Switch up the color because we can't switch up too much. Remember, she's trying to grow her out. So what do you think? It's going to be based on color at the end of the day. Let me know below. Tell me what you think. And otherwise, again, if you have yet to subscribe, join the rest of us. Join the family. Hang out a little bit more. And, you know, all of that good stuff. You'll actually... Okay, well, we're going to go now. I'm done speaking. She's so mean. That's pretty. Should we just hang out here for a while?